So after what feels like an eternity, Mage Chronicles of the Rift is finally here. So this is the proof version. As you can see, it's got not for resale printed all over for it. So I have to go through this, look for typos, layout issues. I've already found a few, just kind of going over this at a very high level. But yeah, it's finally here. I'm excited. This is very early on in the production of what this book can become in terms of inspiring comic books, graphic novels, you name it. But also in the variations of this print itself. When you look at this is just standard stock hardcover, very sturdy. This would look great on the in the library on the shelf. The thickness behind this thing, it's a beast. But I can also see where this thing could go when we, in future print runs, where we can get letter embossing, get this in gold foil, really see this thing in even leather bound. Imagine this whole thing bound in leather, hardcover. Maybe that's a future release. Maybe we do a special card ceremonial release or drop for the audience when we go through that type of production. But it's here, guys. It's finally here. All right, so let's take a look. Let's jump right in. So first and foremost, this book is for my children. The light that turns every late night into morning. The reason this dream rose from paper and became purpose. You are the heart behind every word, every battle, every world within these pages. This began as a story I wanted to tell, but it became a future I wanted to build for you. May this book remind you that imagination is not escape, it is creation, and that every dream, no matter how impossible, can be built if you believe and if you dare to keep going. You are my greatest adventure and the truest magic I will ever know. So with that, we've got an acknowledgements page full of all of the amazing people who have lit the way for MageTCG, including all of our backers in Kickstarter. Contents page, so you can navigate this complex compendium. And then we start 65 million years ago, the veiled genesis before creation, leading up to the architects, who are the first sentient race that rise to power, rise to technological and scientific excellence and mastery, and start seeding galaxies, right? Different planets. They're the original OG architects of humans and merfolk. There's some destruction along the way. So we've also introduced some of the angels. So a lot of the people from the community who created a character, if you were an angel, my attempt at this stage was to include you, to make sure that you were a part of the foundational lore as a saving element at the Destruction of Mars event, and one of the saviors bringing people here to Earth and guiding over humanity. So your stories have the potential to continue, but you were also a part of shaping this foundational series, which is amazing. So we have Thalor, Aurelius, Moxbane, Phelan, Josara, Ardentis. All you guys are in here. So, and this is just, a call to action to everyone else out there. We want to let your story be a part of what we're building. We've had people share, stories about themselves, their children, their loved ones, people who've passed on. I had one person whose son passed away. And she created a character for him, and, we spoke once, and she did, cry while we talked together, and it was just beautiful, to hear the way that storytelling and, everybody's put a little bit of their soul into this, goods and bads and all the in-betweens of who we are as humans. And I think it's in that element that I want to encourage people to step forward, because, as we build this project, we're going to be reaching out to more artists and more writers to continue building the product offering. So that means comic books, graphic novels, scripts for movies. Obviously, we're going to try to get there, but we got to walk before we run. Got a lot of things ahead of us too. We got to build the player base organically. Got to work with our retailers. That's paramount. But as we go, this has the potential in it to serve as the foundational lore for something quite large. But through a lot of shenanigans, and I can't give away all of the elements of the book. We've got some really fun stuff in there that takes us through Atlantis, how we got here on Earth, all the things that happened in the in-between, leading up to the year 2030, where we start to see the introduction of AI and VR and other advanced technologies, and some of the key actors that emerge in that time frame that influence some of the later stages of our world. How did we get to a post-apocalyptic future? What were some of the foundational elements that disrupted global economies, for example? Those answers and more all in here. Finally, we start to explore Mars. There's some things that are not so good that happened in our first adventure. There's a vignette in here that tells the story of some of the people that were involved in the community or inspired characters early on in this story's timelines. And then we cut back to Earth. Something not so great came from Mars. We fight that back, and then finally, we discover the Rift Sword, and that's what really activates this whole ancient mechanism that controls the Rift. That's when we see the ascension of the Mage through the ethereal light. Your midichlorian, for your Star Wars fans out there, your midichlorian in our context is the ethereal light, and that is the power that turns you into Mage. Good or bad, it doesn't choose, it just enhances. So when we open the Rift, the Mage event happens, and we suddenly become the enhanced version of ourselves, and we also take on one of the 15 different Mage classes, and it goes a lot deeper, guys. I'll get there in just a bit, but all right. So we've got the angels written into the storyline, and then that's where we talk about what happens from this point on. The Rift is open. Obviously, there's the multiverse, when we start to talk about other brands like Spider-Man and seeing things like that. But there's also things like what not to do. And we're definitely not going to be dipping into cartoon land. We're not going to see Spider-Pig or anything crazy like that grace the stage of what we're building here. This is for a brand oriented more towards adults. We want this to shine and be a serious product. And not saying the other one isn't, but I think in retrospect, there's some things that, as an art director, I personally want to see, and I think a lot of others agree with, is this deserves a grittier, deeper, more hard-hitting tone than a lot of those other products that have been coming out. All right, so we're at the Rift. The Rift is open. A lot of cool things coming down the pipeline. This is where our, a literary wild card, right? The Rift. It does give us access to an infinite amount of other worlds. It allows us to work with other world builders and other writers so that we can integrate their universes into ours and find ways to collaborate, but at the same time, not lose the integrity of our lore so that we commoditize things with popular brands and doing crossovers. This isn't the Jetsons and the Flintstones crossover set. This isn't, a Lord of the Rings crossover set. This isn't any one of the many crossover sets that we've seen over the past 5-8 years. But we can certainly work with artists that are emerging. And I think that that's the exciting part for all of this, is the card game, the book itself. These are all platforms, all templates. Every card can be replaced by another artist, and we can do alternate artwork variations. We can also work with writers to expand, like I said earlier, expand this whole thing through books, comics, graphic novels, even movies down the line. And we can do it with the people that are really hungry to really build something together and source a new generation of talent. Let's bring others up with us. There's a lot of people out there that are hungry, that need to feed their families, and a lot of artists that deserve attention. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to one day work with you. So come on forward, take a look at what we're building. But back to this, guys. All right, so this is the cosmology, a cartography of creation between the Rift and the currents between, it expands on the Etherion, the Rift, the Radiant Veil. It kind of breaks things down from a world-building context. We talk about the resonance hierarchy. So that's the taxonomy of life and power within the Etherion. Like we mentioned earlier, the midichlorian equivalent, the ethereal light, the divine orders, the riftborn, the caretakers, your mages, which is the ethereal light bonded with mortals, universals, which are your sentient peoples, everybody else. Not necessarily gifted with magic, but you could be any one of the sentient races. And there's also constructs, beasts, and flora. And we actually cover flora in its own section a little bit later in the book. We cut over to the Relic Codex. We talk about Edge Relics, Projection Relics, Weave Relics, Ward Relics, Crown Relics, Arc Relics, and Vessel Relics. And not necessarily that these terminologies will be integrated into the game, but to start thinking about how do we label, how do we really start to categorize all of this stuff so that in the future it becomes more useful. If we were to embark on the journey of creating an open world RPG, how would we start making that system of information, even in the slightest way, accessible to a programmer or game developer so that they can pull that in and make it an enjoyable experience, right? So it starts with things like this, with naming and categorizing and really thinking about the foundation of everything, including the mage classes, taxonomy of mortal channels of etheric power. So this is where we start to look at Aeromancer, Voltomancer, Hydromancer, Pyromancer, geomancer, alchemist, artificers, but not only just individual classes, the categories they belong to. So this is the elementalist category, the arcanists, and then we have the occultists. Each one of these is aligned to a specific focus, an alignment, a resonant medium, and for many that's a gemstone or an element. Resonant alignment, so for many that's a month or a specific cycle, like the Veil cycle, which is every 9 days. And then the sphere, instinct, will, chaos, and living magic, shadows, secrecy, duality, and unseen truths. Okay, so you can see how all of this starts to... Sorry about going into character there for a moment, but you can see how a lot of this starts to create the framework for a larger RPG, which is what we're aspiring to build. Bestiaries, so Hypnotoad, you were definitely top of mind, created by PJ Way. Fantastic artwork. I just love reptiles and amphibians and frogs like these. They're just chub toads. I love them. Making them gigantic and deadly, making them hypnotic is hilarious. But anyway, so that's the artwork we chose for the Bestiary page. But that's a compendium of creatures shaped by ether and evolution alike. So remember, this is post-apocalyptic. We are working in a future filled with radiation, all sorts of mutations and stuff like that. And that's really what was the cool part about bringing back traditional fantasy characters and really populating an entire world with post-apocalyptic fantasy, bringing back elves, bringing back goblins, trolls, and all the normal fantasy, but they're not old school. They don't have 10 million years of history. They're new, they're evolved, they're more deadly. It was fun to tell the story in that context. That also inspired a lot of other things too, like vampires. One spoiler I can give away is our vampires are actually further mutated elves. Ones that move into seclusion, go underground, start feeding off the life in caves, and they emerge with a thirst for blood. So dark as hell, got the pointy ears. Remember, pointy ears. Now they develop fangs, they get vicious, their skin becomes light. Why do they get the skin turn light? Because they're in caves. I'll end it there. So we're talking about the bestiary. We got a little off track. It's all right. We're telling the story, guys. So yeah, celestials and eldritch. These are the avatars and aberrations, angels and dragons, which are your caretakers, the devils and demons. Then we move into primordial and elementals. So elemental, jinn and ifrits, dryads, nymphs and fairies, and more. And it goes through all of the major sentient species that matter to this world. And we try to be as inclusive as possible. You know, we wanted to build this thing for scale and for longevity. One of my favorite characters, Carburetor, Dandelion, Bard of Sonic Freedom. Art by Enigma. This guy is hilarious. Check out the YouTube page. We've got some animated versions of this dude, and he's fun to work with. I think our team is really going to love it in the future, you know, turning this into an episodic type of a structure with content creation. We're giving these guys storylines and interactions. We're animating them with more professional tools. I see a lot of life for this guy here. He's gonna be the badass that comes in once, maybe twice a season, really kind of sets things off. Maybe he provides useful utility. He helps out in a situation and adds some comic relief. He's going to be lovable, but also, you know, incredibly useful. So that's what I like about Carburetor Dandelion. Yeah, we got some big basilisks. Liliana Heirloom by Sam I Am. She's going to play a cool role. We haven't fully written out her story yet, but I definitely see a lot of life and potential behind her. Phantom Feed by Saeed. Who's Ronin. Blood Moon Seeker. One of our first werewolves. Oh yeah, we got werewolves too, regular wolves. Flora, so now we're getting into the plant life. So another thing too, you know, you're looking at games like Skyrim and Breath of the Wild and Witcher and whatnot, you know, collecting various plant life and spells and potions and creating them and whatnot is definitely a big part of the world building process. You know, having that being a part of a future RPG would be amazing. So I really put the time and effort into thinking about this thing. Like, we need aquatic flora, flowers and blossoms, fungus, grasses and fields, mythic flora, so a variety of different magic infused flora, parasites and corruptions, things that, you know, are obviously death-oriented or rotting-oriented. Shrubs and vines, trees of power and memory. So I really liked, you know, what Avatar did with that living tree concept. So bringing some life to the trees, bringing memory, history, legacy, lineage to trees, I think it was cool. And that kind of really kicked off some ideas and thoughts on how we could break out trees. And then we break out into the factions, and this is actually the artwork used in one of the cards, Mage's Ascension, which was part of our Kickstarter stretch goals. So anyone who backed the campaign over $1, you're getting a set of all 16 cards. And then everybody who got a copy of the book will get a copy of the Ether Gate, which is another promotional card. So this was like I was saying earlier, not only are there different mage classes, there's different factions. So we wanted different religions and different polities so that we can really build this into something that I would say is more inspired by Game of Thrones. Something with deep politics, with political tension, with, betrayals and sabotage and all the cool things that come with a series like Game of Thrones. How do we build out that level of complexity? How, if we're in an open world RPG, can we go from one land to another and have this political, group of people at war with that one, or this secret cult engaged with that one? So these became necessary as we wanted to start developing each of the city locations inside of this world building process. So you see, Children of the Void, Church of the Eternal Code, Church of the Eternal Flame, the Draconic Sepulchre, Order of Solaris. We got a lot of them. I'm not going to read them all. Then we get into the political groups, the Architects of the New Dawn, Cloud Nomads, Eternal Court of the Fae, Whispering Grove, Warlord Confederacies. Got a lot of good ones. And there's always room for more, right? And I think that's what we have here, is something that's modular. We can always append this universe and build something together and really make writers and artists a part of the process. So as we start to build this universe, imagine that this is the Lord of the Rings map, and this is the very bottom left-hand corner. We've got an entire world worth of territory left to cover, so there became a pattern to the way that we started building out these worlds. So it all started with a base root word of the city. We saw things like forests, water locations, plains locations, mountains locations, wastes locations, and then that became a template for developing each one of these core regions. Look at the city, then tack on a word that's relevant to like a forest. So Blackwater Grove, Darkmire Woods, right, forest. So that's how we basically use that formula to kind of scale out 6 different locations and then start mapping them to geographically relevant areas in and around the U.S., and we're going to start to expand that beyond into other territories, but we got to start somewhere. So again, this is like the very bottom left-hand corner of like a Lord of the Rings map. We got a lot of room left to go. And then we also take things to space. So I think that that's the fun vector to all of this, is that, we do have a lot of exciting potential with every place on Earth. It's post-apocalyptic, 150 years in the future-ish. And now we're moving into the Rift. We're going to different, galaxies potentially through the Rift. There's a little bit of a story about me, why I started this, what I've gone through as a person, as a professional, tells my story in more detail. We don't need to spend too much time with that. You guys can always learn more about me through a lot of the stuff I do and have posted online. Artists, so the Keepers of the Light. So this is a piece, Spiritual Seer. You'll see that in the game created by Mellow Man. His work is just outstanding. All of the artists' work really just blows my mind, but his was selected for this page because I do believe just visually and with the complexity and overall texture of this illustration, my goodness, I want to see posters of this thing, man. I want to see it hanging in galleries. Here are a list of the artists that helped on the very first print run and the very first set of arts. So Enigma, Sam I Am, Mellow Man, PJ, Ms. Joe Knows, Saeed. Thank you all so much for your help and working hard to keep this thing going and to make sure that we can create a sustainable system for yourselves and other artists to come. But here we get into some of Mellow Man's other work. So we did the Human Phobias and Nightmares. This is the Nightmare set, trapped in a cage, being chased. And oh, by the way, now we are in a art gallery-esque section of the book where I've just dedicated these pages to showing off and giving a taste for what's to come from some of the really exciting art pieces that our team has created. Bug Infestation, Animal Attack, Spitting Glass. They're intense, guys. They're intense. And I've actually had some people approach me and say that they felt uneasy after seeing some of the artworks. And I'm like, I feel that, like this is meant to evoke emotion hit us at home. Many of us share these fears. So to be able to explore that through intense artwork, does it highlight who you are? This one especially. The holes. I think a lot of people out there, have that trypophobia. Think of things like sunflowers and other, like kneeling on the bag of peas. I'm sure you've seen that meme before. It's just, it really gets you. Here we get into the phobias: fear of small spaces, fear of death, fear of needles, fear of blood, and very stylistic. Here we have a painterly set created by myself, World Reforged. I just love the energy and the natural, grace. This is my favorite. Torment. The darkness of the blues really shows you the deeper struggle and the solitude that comes from it. And then there's a lot of others in this series as well, but like I said, we're, just trying to highlight a few from each of the different art styles that are going into this so that we can just really kind of show the vision, show the world of how diverse we see this becoming, but how it does really fall back on true artistic integrity, how we want real, authentic artists, whether you're using the assistance of technology or not. We're going to be able to tell, and we're going to make sure that all the people that we work with, have the talent to really execute a vision that is truly unique, has their own signature look and feel, and you can see with the intensity that these bring forward, where this thing could really go. I love this guy here. Back to Mellow Man for a moment. You got some more of his Christian-themed artwork. Heavy texture use. A lot of different elements to his work. And I think the overall orange and warm color palette that Mellow Man uses really is a signature to his style. I mean, it's just occasionally using blues and other cools, but, very sparingly. Very sparingly. Especially this one. Just gorgeous. So this is obviously a lot darker than what we were just seeing with angels and, blessings and things like that. This is an ancient torture devices series. So looking back at cards, like from different card sets, some of them had cards like your torture racks and all the things that took away life from your opponent and inconvenienced your opponent and made things difficult for your opponent, right? So drawing reference to that, I really wanted to reimagine these things in a dark and horrific way, but also beautiful. So we see like the Iron Maiden, thumb screws, Scavenger's Daughter, the Stake, the Vice, the Judas Cradle. And then we get into the DSM focused set. One of the foundational pillars for the brand that we're building is a focus on helping with mental health and other causes. So really using this as a stepping stone for storytelling and a way to show respect is a big part of what we're building. Emotional damage, depression, paranoia, dementia, neurosis, delirium, PTSD, anxiety attack, hysteria. So we try to get, just a high-level view of some of the things out there and really go vivid, really go bold with the artwork. And a lot of this does draw from, Mexican artwork. You see like Dia de los Muertos. A lot of that, that type of artwork inspired some of these illustrations. Now we get into the 7 deadly sins and heavenly virtues. So each virtue is met with a sin: charity, greed, chastity, lust, diligence and sloth, humility and vanity, gratitude and envy, patience and wrath, temperance and gluttony. Now this one is the Oppenheimer set. With cards like Magic the Gathering, there's always cards that destroy everything or have tabletop clearing properties. So we wanted to be careful as we approach those and do it in a thematic way that, sparks the conversation. If this is the Oppenheimer set, if we do quote, which is here at the bottom, each of the cards in this set also quotes J. Robert Oppenheimer. But we've got a few people, this comes from his quote at the time of the launch of the atomic bomb. A few people laughed, a few people cried. Most people were silent. I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. And then finally, we wrap things up with the MageTCG rules, how to play, all the basics you're going to need to get rocking and rolling. all the different variants. So we've got, basics on how the game play works, different variants. So now we can appeal to a variety of different players that like to play more aggressively, like to play different variants and styles. We have all of that accounted for. So we've got a ton of different game formats, game modes, rules for your mage, the game variants themselves, starting the game, turn structure. We go through everything. Card types, playmat zones. There's a copy of the playmat. Combat and damage, core game rules, universal abilities, all card types. So this is going to be kind of like your reference guide to all of the major ability keywords. They're all going to be in here. Even if they're not in this print run, we've accounted for, what works and what we think will be the base for most of these. This is the running list. Future versions may add a few more, though. Spell-specific abilities, relic-specific abilities, location-specific abilities, and then finally a rules appendix. So this is going to be for judges, competitive players, and tournament organizers. There's a lot of edge cases and things that, they'll want to take note of in here. And then finally, just a call to action to join the community. Included the usernames so that you can find me, find the brand, should you want to join us in participate. We do a lot of giveaways. We have a lot of positions in the future once we get this thing off the ground that will be opening up, from professional positions to artists, writers, you name it. So get involved now if you like storytelling, if you like fantasy, if you see a way to contribute and a way to help. We definitely would love to hear from you. Book is here. Let me know if you need a copy, if you haven't already reserved one, and I can see you before we finalize this thing and send it off per print. But thank you everyone so much for being a part of this journey with me. It's meant the world. There's a lot of work to come, and I'll see you on the other side.